When I was growing up, every single Saturday morning, we had the exact same routine. We'd come downstairs in our pajamas with our bed head, we'd gather around our kitchen counter, and we would have cocoa and toast for breakfast. Now that may sound kind of weird, but don't knock it until you try it. We would take buttery toast, dunk it in hot chocolate, and then eat the soggy goodness that was cocoa and toast. Oh, so good. And that's something we had every single week. We knew every morning on Saturdays we would have our cocoa and toast. My parents also growing up every night had the pattern that they would read the Bible storybook with me. And all these years later, I still remember what the illustrations looked like in those books because we read them every night. And my parents then would pray with me before I went to sleep. See, these predictable patterns in my life and in the life of our family showed me as a young child what was important. It showed me what my parents held dear to, that family time on Saturdays, being in the Word and connecting with Jesus in prayer. See, predictable patterns help us see what's important in our lives. Sometimes we realize some of the predictable patterns in our lives aren't all that beneficial, and we realize maybe there's things in our lives that we're lifting up that are as important that really aren't important. They reveal what is significant to us. And so the early church, we can learn from them because they set patterns based on Jesus' teachings and his words to help inform them and guide their lives so that they clung to what was significant. In Acts chapter 2, we see that they were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to gathering together and breaking bread. And this word, these Greek words for breaking bread, are the same words that Jesus used when he gathered with his disciples at the Last Supper, when he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. This is the cup, the covenant. This is my blood that is shed for you." And then he said these words, "Do this in remembrance of me." He was saying, after I have died and rose again and I ascend into heaven, I want you to continue to do this in remembrance of me. I want you to set this as a pattern for your life, or as Pastor Tim calls it, a sacred rhythm. Well, in Acts chapter 20, we read that some followers of Jesus are doing this exact same thing. They are breaking bread, it says in verse 7. And the interesting thing about this, so this is the same Greek word, so this shows that they're having communion. These same Greek words show up just as Jesus had said, just as the other disciples had done in Acts chapter 2. But in Acts chapter 20, where we read these words again, this is about 27 years after Jesus has ascended into heaven, and it's about 1,200 miles away from Jerusalem, where the Last Supper happened and where the first followers in Acts chapter 2 were gathered. Now, in the ancient world, information did not just disseminate like it does today in a second. I mean, they didn't have the technology to support that. So spreading information and giving news and sharing patterns takes and would have taken such intentionality. And then it was 27 years later, and yet these followers of Jesus are still doing this. And the news of celebrating the Last Supper, the news of celebrating communion has spread, and it has become a predictable pattern based on the teachings of Jesus and helping inform those communities of what was important. And so I think about that in my life, and I think about that for the patterns that I'm cultivating for myself and for my family. And I want for my kids to see predictable patterns in my life, to know what's important to me. And I want to set those in the life of our family too, so that when my girls are old and grown, they'll think back and go, yeah, my Bible reading started because I saw my parents reading. But it makes me then think about now, am I setting that pattern in my life so that my girls are seeing it, and so that they can see that predictability in my life? I want to definitely create fun moments like the cocoa and toast moments, but I also want to create those moments that are predictable so that they know that I'm grounded in the instructions and the teachings of Jesus, and I'm doing my best to ground them in that as well. So I have to ask you, what are the predictable patterns in your life based on the teachings of Jesus? How are your patterns, how are the things, the routines and the rhythms in your life impacting those around you? Are your kids and your grandkids, your coworkers or your roommates or your friends or your neighbors, are they seeing predictable patterns in your life that point them to the word of Jesus and the love of Jesus? So this week, maybe even start thinking about, what are the things that I do every day? What are the rhythms? What are the things I do every week? And how are they revealing what's important to me? Are they pointing to the words and the love of Jesus, or something else? And then, my friends, pray along with me and let's ask God to help us cultivate patterns in our lives that are predictable but based on what is important.